everybody. This is C.W. Allen. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and allowing me into your circle. I know many of you are probably tired of Zoom meetings, so I'll try to be quick. I'm a good friend of Kevin Ons, your youth pastor, and Kevin, lived with me for a little while. Kevin worked with me and served at the ministry that I work at, and Kevin also danced with me. You heard that correctly. Kevin came to my wedding and he danced. He didn't quite dance his clothes off like David, but he danced a lot. And so I encourage you to get married and to invite Kevin to your wedding, because he'll dance for you, and that's always a good thing. But thanks again for having me. Just glad to spend some time with y'all. And today we're going to talk about poverty. What it is, what it isn't, how should we process it? You know, some of you maybe come from backgrounds where poverty isn't an issue. It's not something that you look over your shoulder and think about. For others, that may be your life story. Maybe you came to the States with a family and you had to navigate poverty, or you just grew up in the States in poverty. Wherever you land in the conversation, I think there's something for everyone as we process and talk about this. And so today we just want to spend some time doing that. But before we begin, we need to start at the beginning of where you all began with your time here these last 3 weeks with Shalom, right? Like there's this idea of peace, but not just any peace, true peace, right? Like a better definition or understanding of Shalom is, in this context of what we're looking at in the Bible, is flourishing. Is to flourish. That means to live life to the full, the way God intended it to be. We were supposed to have a perfect relationship with God, with other people, with ourselves, and with the creation. But that gets broken. That gets tore up when sin enters the world, right? Like either we think there is no God, or we think we are God, and give ourselves too much time and attention, or we ignore God completely. We have a bad relationship with others. Right? Like, what's the first thing Adam does in the garden when sin and death enters the world, and God asked them why they did what they did? The woman you gave me, God, it's her fault that she gave me the fruit, and it's your fault that you gave her to me. So immediately off the bat, we blame others, we miscommunicate with others, we hurt others, intentionally and unintentionally. The next relationship that we see broken, or a situation that we want fixed, is our relationship with ourselves, right? Like we take ourselves too serious. We're either very arrogant and prideful, or we have a lot of very low self-esteem, where we take ourselves too serious and giving ourselves all the attention. Woe is me, I'm so this and that. And it goes even deeper, because some of us may even have chemical imbalances that cause mental health struggles, because sin entered the world and it messes everything up. And our relationship with ourselves is a byproduct of that, our minds, our hearts. And that manifests in many different ways. And the last one is with creation. We were made to enjoy living on the earth. Right? Like that's something that we don't talk about a lot, but God didn't create the earth just to burn it up and throw it away. He didn't just create the earth for us to damage and destroy and not think about the consequences that will follow. God gave us the earth as a gift to steward. And so the 4 areas that we're supposed to flourish in, that we're supposed to live life to the full, enjoy with total peace, are devastated.
The have and the have-nots. The line. The place that people on the bottom are trying to get to, and the place that people on the top are trying to keep from going below. They don't want to look below it either. They don't want to see what's down there, because that'll make them feel too guilty about being above it. One of my first jobs was working at a bank downtown. And when I would say to people where I came from, where I lived, they would be so shocked. Really? You lived over there? Because they don't expect people from K-Town or certain areas to be able to get out and get good jobs and to actually look like success. I was one of the youngest supervisors at the bank. I didn't have my first child till I was 30. I didn't have to depend on anyone. And all the bottom fell out in one fall. It's just all the bottom fell out. There was a screw. My boot got caught in the screw and I fell head first, 14 feet, into a wall. I broke my arm in two places. I knocked my brain into my spinal column. So it's caused me to start having strokes. I ended up having to have brain surgery where they had to take a big piece of my skull out so my brain could breathe. It took me 15, 20 years to finally get back to where I could be up and around. And keep in mind that I had a 7-month-old, a 2-year-old, and a 6-year-old. I knew I needed to leave, to move out of that neighborhood when my son turned 7.
See, I had a lot of fun as a child running up and down the block. I didn't realize that I was around one of the biggest drug operations right behind my house. There was a lot of stuff being sold in and out through there. They'd ask me to take something to someone else. You know, I've done that in the building, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. I was just delivering, you know, thinking, hey, they asked me to take this down.
Some of these little boys I knew were bad news. He didn't, but I knew. This house that we live in now used to belong to my parents. And then when my father passed, the house was just too much for my mother to handle. So my sister, my brother, myself, we all moved out here to live with my mom. And together we made it a community home, which is what, you know, quite often happens when people are trying to, you know, get out of a bad situation. Right after, about a year after my accident, I realized that I would not be the same. And I went on disability. And disability gave me $1,000. It was, at that time, it was like $900 a month. I had 3 children. They gave me $900 a month for me, and they gave me $122, I think, for each child. Keep in mind, that's to pay my rent. I had food stamps, but it wasn't a lot, so a lot of times we would run out of food stamps.
It's not that much stuff in here.
Yeah, but it's not as organized as it should be. The whole world is seeing. Giving my children hope, that was the hard part, because they went to a private school, so they lived with all these people who were very well off, who drove nice cars, whose parents were giving them credit cards to spend carte blanche. And then they came back here, and I'm saying, nope, we don't buy name brand gym shoes. Nope, we're not going out to eat. We got to do whatever mama's got to cook. It was disappointing from a mother's point, because I wanted to give them the best. And I always thought when I had my children, I was going to be able to shower them. That was my desire, as I think most parents. That was my desire, but I wasn't able to do that.
Before we go any further, I want to give you a moment to break out into groups. So we'll split up the chat. We'll let everybody go into rooms. We'll take roughly about 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes. And I want you to jot down as many causes to poverty as you can. Why are people poor? Go. All right, welcome back. So some of these different reasons why people are poor, you may have thought them or written them down in your group, but I'm going to just place them here on the chart and we'll just process it together. So you may say, we'll start with the first section. You may say, well, bad decisions, right? Like people make bad decisions, therefore they're poor. Like addictions that they have, gambling, drugs, alcohol. Maybe they keep having sex, right, and having babies so they can't afford to live. And even though that sounds messed up, a lot of us might believe it, right? Criminal behavior. You want us to care about your neighborhood, but you keep looting. So obviously, you have an issue. Divorce, laziness. You dropped out of school. If you would just listen and get educated, I guarantee you can make it. Like everybody's doing it. This next middle section, there's some other ones that popped up as well. How are you poor? Because you're born into it. Maybe you have illness or you lost your health insurance, right? Like there's this huge war and debate about health insurance. If you ain't got health insurance, you break your leg, it could be a wrap. It's like, it's not a good situation. Mental illness, right? We talked about that earlier. Maybe you have schizophrenic attacks, right? And it flares up and you can't keep a job, or people are afraid of you or don't want to be around you, or they put you in, asylums or whatever the case may be. So mental health is a real thing, and it's a real challenge that causes poverty. Most of the poor people that you see on the streets are people with mental illnesses. Loss of jobs, accidents, right? Like, remember Sheila's story? She steps on a nail and falls down 4 flights of stairs and knocks her brain into her spinal column. Don't nobody plan for that. Like, that's crazy. Her life was sad. The next column, you'll see different ones. You're born into poverty, unjust laws in the legal system, your race, ethnicity. Like, these things can affect you getting jobs and having opportunities. And we know from what we've talked about in the past week that this is a real thing. Criminal justice system. This is one that we don't probably think a lot about unless we have a family member who is in the system. But even the fact that people have to check a box that says they have committed a crime after they've served their time, paid their debt to the society, they still have to check a box that leaves a stigma on them, regardless of what they did. Unequal education, right? Like, there was one time in our after school program, a young girl came up to me and she said, "Mr. CW, can you make a photocopy of my homework?" Because she lost the paper, do her homework. So I got her friend's copy of the paper, was making a copy of it, and I noticed it was from a textbook. And so I said, "Well, honey, where's the book at?" And she goes, "Well, they don't give us books here in our school because they don't have enough. So the teacher just makes copies of the book for us." And it really hurt to hear that, because I know of schools on the opposite side of towns and in communities that are white and a little bit more well off financially, and they get iPads when they start school. Our kids can't even get a book. And so we broke these 3 into specific columns for a reason. So if you look at the first column, there's a trend that's happening here. And the first thing that we notice is that these are all personal sins, or these are things that you do, like choices that you make. And typically, this is the column that's the easiest for us to feel, especially as Americans. The next one is the middle column, and they're tragic circumstances. The next one that we realize here as we look is a column that highlights different woes of systems. And so we call this one systematic oppression. And so the first column is your personal choice. The middle column is, out of your control. It's a tragedy. It's a choice that you didn't have the opportunity to make. And then the last column is is a choice that others make for you. Your choice, the choice you didn't have, and the choice that others made for you. And so if we look at the first column and we isolate the first column, and we ask ourselves, well, what would be your attitude towards the people in this column? So say you had a cousin and they were doing some of these things and you disapprove of them. What would be your attitude towards them if you didn't think the other columns existed? There is no tragedy and there is no systems of oppression. It's just the choices you make. What would be your attitude towards them if they keep doing this stuff? Your attitude probably would be judgmental. You probably would begin to look at them and say, if they would just pull it together, then maybe they'd be better. If we look at the third column here, and we process that by itself, not thinking about the first column, so there's no personal choices, and then there is no systems that oppress people, just a whole bunch of random things that happen or situations, these tragedies. What would be our attitude towards these people? We typically would pity them. We would look at them as, man, like, you just got a bad deck, you know. We usually wouldn't look at that person as someone that we would call on to depend on for help. So we would enable them maybe, but we would pity the person. They're not good for anything because they can't really get it together. In the last column, if we looked at that one isolated by itself, not thinking about personal sin, not thinking about the tragedy that people experience, we will probably develop one or two things. We would either try to avoid it, right? Like we don't want to deal with systems because systems are so big. Nobody wants to be Martin Luther King and get killed. Nobody wants to go against a system like Jesus and get hung on the cross. And so we avoid it, or we live a very comfortable life and we deny it. We act as if it never existed or it doesn't exist, even when it's right in our face on the news, or we may have classmates or people who have experienced the systems. I want someone to do me a favor and pull open your Bible and look at Micah 6:8. So in Micah 6:8, God makes it clear through the prophet that he's talking through that he has a plan for this mortal, this person, for people. And his plan is that we would act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. So if we're looking at the third column, the systematic oppression, the only way we can not deny it or deny it is we need to become people of justice. These tragic circumstances or pity, the only way that we can truly become people who don't just pity other people is that we love mercy. The last section, the personal sin section, the only way that we cannot become judgmental when we look at people who have sin that we probably don't subscribe to is that we walk humbly with God. You know, Kendrick Lamar says it the best, the theologian from out there in California. Be humble. Sit down. We have to be humble people. As you look at this chart in its full totality, as we process Micah 6:8, I just want you to take a second and ask, who are the poor? If you're really processing it, only answer you have is everyone. Because every one of us is poor. Every one of us has some type of poverty because we lack shalom. The reality is that some people just have more money to cover it up than others.